Okay, so we discussed arrays and we looked at collections of different types. So we have our integer type, we have our string type, character type, and we put those together into an array, which is just a collection of multiple values of a certain type. So let's look at the world and say, well, when I look at, as a teacher, when I look at a classroom or look at a setting where I would be teaching, I don't see integers and strings. I see students. I see the subject I'm teaching. I see a grade book. I see an attendance sheet. The things that we look at in the world come with a lot of different attributes and a lot of different qualities to them, and we operate, and when we think about them, we think about them at that level. We don't think about them at the integer and string level for the most part. So what do we do when we're programming? How do we take our human way of looking at the world as objects that interact with each other and put that into code? We actually define our own types, and this is object-oriented programming, and that's what we're going to start with here. I want to introduce object-oriented programming, or at least the idea of classes, very early on, so that you understand what's going on behind the scenes. You understand how to access things that are in a class, how classes and objects are related, and how to work with objects. So let me give you an example. Let's say I did not work with classes and objects, and I wanted to talk about my students. Well, let's say, okay, I've got a class of students. I'm going to say student number. So that would be an integer. That would make more sense to be an integer. Student number equals 1. And then I would say, well, string student 1 first name equals Candace. String student 1 last. Say, okay, as we're building this, if you build multiple students, or you have a class of 30 students, you're going to have so many variables, so many things that you have to keep track, but they're just kind of loosely related based on the variable name, like student number, student 1, etc. So what if we could encapsulate all of that information into one variable, into one thing that we can, like we had the values when we were referring to the arrays, instead of having, to refer to or create 30,000 integers and then manage all of those working through the program, we could create one array of X number of, or N number of integers and deal with it like that. Work with it just by that array's identifier, the array's name. The same thing here. We have the ability to define our own types and create objects from them that have their own identity, that have their own existence, that encapsulates all of the information about a student. And it's very simple. We just use the word class. It's a keyword. Now, I'm going to ask you to create a new file. Go to Add, New Item. Right-click on your project, Add, New Item, Class. It should be selected for you out of the gate. And create it called Student. Now, behind the scenes, if you'll see here what Visual Studio has done for us, it has added a file into our directory underneath this project called student.cs. So over here, these refer to files. And in here, it went ahead and created a class with the name of what we had named that file, which is student. And the reason it does that is one of the, I guess, typical things done is, in kind of a convention, is to create one class per file so you can manage them. That it's a little easier to manage and see what's going on in your code base. There's a lot to do there as a programmer. A lot of your work is managing complexity, and so some of these conventions and things that happen like that, like having one class per file, assists in managing the complexity as a developer. but we'll get to that later. We'll get further down the line. I want to ask you to trust me. One of these moments where I ask you to just have faith in me, and I'll explain what something means later down the line, but I want to get you exposed to a way of doing things before we discuss all of the ways of doing things, before we discuss the best ways of doing things. So I want you to add the keyword public in front of class student. So what we had done earlier is I'd given the student a first name, I'd given the student a last name, we're going to give them an age. So as you see, and as we've discussed earlier, these braces encapsulate something. What we're saying is this class student encapsulates multiple values, multiple types of things like a first name. So I will go ahead and declare a variable called first name. And every object, every type, so we have, integer equals 5. An integer represents whole numbers. A student is a higher level object, and we're going to represent multiple values with the variables within it. So those values are actually the types that we've already learned. They're the variable types that we've already learned. Strings and integers and characters. So I'm going to create a last name, and I'm going to create an age. Now, when I want to discuss students, or keep track of students, or do things in the code related to students, all I have to do is create a student object from this class. So classes are blueprints, but objects are actual things in memory. So just like we had declared an integer and we said integer value equals something, student equals, to create a new object of a student, we go to new student, and that is a special method called a constructor. We'll get to that later. But we're saying give me a new student. Now this student represents a first name, a last name, an age, and anything that you defined in the class. So I can set those values. I said that student.firstName was a string, so I just assigned it a string. And this student also has a last name. And I assigned it a last name. In the same way that you had assigned variables earlier when they were not a part of a class, we're just accessing it, the object that we've created. 17. I'm not really 17, by the way. So now we've collected all of these values together, right, into a single concept called a student. And we can work with that concept now at a higher level that helps us think about the world and organize our world in a way that we can program against it in a higher level of abstraction, and more of the way that we would think about it as a human when we're dealing with students and how this student interacts with this other student. One other thing that I want to show you about a class is that you can actually also define methods. So in the same manner that we had defined methods a couple videos ago, we just define a method that says int, I'm going to return the age. Return age. So all of the things encapsulated within these braces are available and usable. So when I say I'm returning age here, I'm returning this value, whatever that may be, with a method. None of this is new. None of what's happening in here is new to you. It's just all encapsulated within a class. And this object now contains a method that we can call, just like we're calling console.writeLine or console.readKey, a method called return age. which is going to return an age. Still nothing new. If we call that within console.writeLine, we'll get the age, 17. If I change the age of the student, let's say I change the student's age, and then I call it again. This will show you once again how sequencing matters when you're programming. We'll see it's 17 and then 25. So we're taking these values that are contained, encapsulated within this class, within this object. Now, with that being said, the difference between a class and an object is the student is an object of type class. We can create other students. We can create multiple students. So I'm going to actually copy this, Control C, and I'm going to create student 2. He's 25. So we have a single class, which is student, but we have two student objects that are created from that blueprint, that are created from that mold, like using a single cookie cutter of a type student and creating multiple students out of Do. So now, let's say I'm going to do student dot first name. Last name. So I've created these are to show you these are two different objects. I changed that. Sorry, student to first name. Isaac and James. What you see here is that there is a first name variable within a student class. But these two different objects have two different values for them. So that is a rough introduction. And my charge to you, my request from you is to look at the world around you and start defining it. You have integers and numbers to define sizes and heights and widths and attributes. You have strings to define the names of things, to define things that you would use to use as text to describe something. You actually have things to determine state, that is true or false, Boolean. Let's say you created a door class. You could say the door class, and you could have a variable named is open, and that can be true or false with Boolean. You have right now, up to this point, with just these handful of videos from the beginning to now, you have a lot of tools in front of you. You just need to start playing with them. Programming is an exercise. I can teach you these concepts, and you can teach you these concepts in a million different ways, and there are thousands of tutorials and videos. But learning to take these concepts and play with them, create objects, create new classes, create different methods, start using the things that we have together, and you can actually start writing programs now if you get a little creative, because you can create classes, you can create methods, you can access those methods within those classes. You can write things out to the console. You can read things from the user from the console. So there's a lot of things that you can do now up to this point if you just put those pieces together. And we're going to build on this. We're going to build on some of the details of what you can do with objects. And we're really at a great place now to propel forward into actually programming algorithms and actually programming logic. So you've got a good base now for us to actually start accomplishing things with our code. So look forward to seeing you in the next video.